So if even for just a few moments, this is so valuable that if this is the only thing that you got out of today, it would be the most positive things you can do for yourself, for your spouse, for your family, and yes, oh, by the way, for your clients. How many of you, when something in life that happens and it's maybe contrary to what your expectations might be, how many of you, if you were honest with yourself and you were to look within your inner dialogue, how many of you notice that you immediately go to, like a default mechanism would be go to what's wrong or something's not right? How many of you have discovered that about yourselves, that by default you'll go to negative? Look, conditioning is so important, just like your physical conditioning is important, right? Just like conditioning yourself or being knowledgeable about what are the best foods that nourish and deliver energy to your body. Mental conditioning and emotional conditioning is also important. One of the prime ways of doing that is to continually train yourself to focus on what can you be grateful for. Or even in the midst of circumstances happening that might not meet what your expectations are, might be contrary to your expectations, what if you conditioned yourself or trained yourself to ask, what is the gift in this? If I were to look for the silver lining, what might it be? If we had a field or a lot next door, either next door to your house or next door to this office, if we had just a bare dirt field, what happens to that field over time if you do nothing with it? What's that? Weeds grow. Do you have to do anything? Do you have to pay any attention to it whatsoever? In spite of your best intentions mentally of going, I don't want fields to grow, I don't want weeds to grow in my field, are they going to happen in spite of your best intentions? As a culture, we do that with our minds. In other words, we're focused on educating ourselves, on continuing to learn and continuing to grow all throughout our education years, and for some of us even through college. As soon as we're done with college or as soon as we get into a career, what happens for, not this room, but what happens for most people going forward? What is their level or the time spent learning? What happens for most people? Declines rapidly, right? And the muscle called your brain, your mindset, is not unlike the field next door, where in the absence of proactive activity, what's going to happen with your mind? It'll default to weeds, right? Your brain, scientifically, when they look at your brain defaults to negativity. Why? It's a survival mechanism. Think about where we were as a culture even just 200 years ago, or 500 years ago, or 1,000 years ago, right? Americans take for granted the fact that every single day, like, do you know that no one in the United States typically dies from a lack of water? Like, no one dies from dehydration. And yet just 200 years ago, that was prime on our ancestors' mind, was the ability to find water and nourishment. That was high on their list of they've got to find it. It's a mandatory thing. So our brains, we live in the safest, most well-nourished generation of all generations, and our brains by default are programmed to look for what's wrong or what's not right. And if we allow that to continue unchecked, our brain looks like the field next door. And what's wrong becomes always available to us because that's what we, by default, allow our brains to focus on. It's why the news media, what percentage do you think that the news media presents positive, brain, heart-nourishing material versus headline grabs, negativity, if you miss this type of headlines? What percentage do you think are positive versus negative? So it would be fair to say 90% of it is negative. Why do you think they do that? Because it hooks us. It captures our attention. So if even for just a few moments, this is so valuable that if this is the only thing that you got out of today, it would be one of the most positive things you can do for yourself, for your spouse, for your family, and yes, oh, by the way, for your clients. is to at least one day spend a moment thinking about, if you wanted to, what could you be profoundly grateful for?